Okay, I'm now going to turn it over to you folks. What happened to the mics that were out there? Oh, okay, we've got some roaming mics. I'd like you to identify yourselves, but this session is being taped, so if for some reason you don't want your name to appear on tape, then that's fine. And if you could direct your question to one of the panelists, that would be great. If not, then I'll choose whoever should respond to it. Go ahead.
Ms. Marsden about the study. I guess I'm a little confused. In PCEM, why didn't you include life sciences? To me, that's science and technology. Why is that? Social sciences, I understand education, that's kind of artsy, being an engineer, but life sciences, to me?
Because those are the way we could get the data, actually. I mean, the individual category was there in the data that we were able to get. So it simply seemed to make sense.
But how come it wasn't included in PCEM? It's part of technology. You just took it aside, and in PCEM, it looked kind of,
we were trying to
it looked kind of sad, whereas life sciences, there were like a little bit more women.
There's nothing called technology in the Canadian data.
But somehow you put PCEM together and call that a category.
Yes.
And those are science, technology-based. But why was life sciences excluded from that category?
Oh, well, there are a lot of people in life sciences, and there are very different kinds of fields from those other sciences. That was our view. I mean, we could have put them together anyway, I suppose.
Yes, here, and then we'll go over here. Oh, sorry.
Sorry, I stole your question time. I just wanted to say I think you all did great, and this has been, sort of a great discussion. So I'm at the end of my PhD, and I've sort of heard this and talked about this for the last 5 years, and a lot of the changes you guys suggested to me seem fairly simple, like cover up people's names when they apply for fellowships or manuscripts. So I guess my question is, why are these changes taking so long to happen? It almost seems like there's a little bit of resistance, or I'm not sure. I mean, for example, at the Ontario Brain Institute, do you guys review things? Like, can you cover the names? Like, is that happening? Why not? So logistically, it seems like something easy that can be done. And so my question is, why are these changes, I guess, so slow to sort of happen?
And is there any one person you'd like to respond to that? No. Okay, anybody want to take that? Why are these changes so slow? Wendy? Go for it.
Give it to Wendy. She'll do anything.
She'll go into a room with men with guns.
Yeah. Well, I would say that this is no different than any other social issue. I mean, we had some examples: climate change, ending world hunger, ending malaria even. I mean, if you think about, there are a lot, what I have learned working on the fringes of politics is that facts are necessary but insufficient to affect change. And quite frankly, what I would argue about this issue and about things like the representation of women on boards, for example, okay? The decisions that are needed to affect change, whether it's at the institutional level, the policy level, the corporate level, are essentially political decisions, right? People have to change policies, say we're going to do things a different way, and so on. And for the most part, there is resistance to change, not because people are bad people, but they've been doing things the way they do things for many, many years. And if you want to effect change, you actually have to apply pressure in some way. And what I see is insufficient advocacy on these issues. So, something happens with the Canada Excellence Research Chairs that was so blatant and so horrifyingly problematic that a lot of people made some noise, and then they went back to sleep, and they I don't know what the next thing was that people made noise about, but in general, there's a very high level of political disengagement. There's a very high level of consumer disengagement. And it's really going to take people, in my view, standing up and saying, this is important. The way in which a university handles this issue is going to affect whether I send my kid there. If all the mothers in the room, and the fathers too, actually started to use their influence as consumers to say, these things really matter. I really want a welcoming workplace or a welcoming educational environment. I want my kid to have the same opportunities. If more people got actively engaged, we would see more change. But unfortunately, people read the paper and they say, oh, tisk, tisk, that's terrible. But they don't take the next step to call their member of parliament, to call the president of the local university to do something to actually make this a high priority.
Can I just respond to the...
We're going to get Lorna, and then I'll let you, Shiva.
I was just
Go ahead.
going to say, I agree, but you also have to keep looking for unintended consequences. The granting councils now they have a common CV when you apply for a grant. It's your last 5 years. But several women have said to me that there's nowhere on that you can say, but I was off on maternity leave. And so they're disadvantaged. And I think the granting councils are reviewing that now. So you can't speak merely once, you have to keep speaking.
Shiva?
I was just going to address the OBI portion of your question, is that at OBI we have an advantage is that we bring people together across Ontario. So in both those examples, we had brought people together across Ontario. It wasn't OBI staff judging. So we were able to see what the issues are after the judges panel and then after the set of selections we did. So now we have that perspective and we can go back and think, how can we try and change that? For example, this year our entrepreneurs panel, we've been thinking a lot about how do we encourage more women to apply. What changes do we need to make? Was it part of the judging? Was it part of the mechanism? And same with some of the other next round of applications, perhaps we're aware that this is happening, this is the mindset, and that we need to think about how we can change the mechanism.
Okay, we had a question here.
I just wanted to say, first of all, thanks to you all again for coming out, and I only wish that this auditorium was completely packed, and the hope is that moving forward in future years, that maybe one day there will be tons of us in here listening to talks like this. But I have a question that's open to any person on any of the panels. And throughout your talks, I did hear some of you point to or speak to the need for support for females who are in the science or technology industry. And I was just wondering how important it is, you think, mentorship is to those females in those industries. And I'm also very interested to hear perhaps some stories about your mentorship experiences along the way.
Anyone?
Can I
Let's
start?
with Robin.
I was almost done my my postdoc when I found the first woman who was clearly excited about mentoring me and willing to guide me along, and she's been absolutely instrumental in helping me make decisions and encouraging me to continue to grow and to take on new challenges. And I latched onto her with everything that I had because it was the first time I'd found someone who was actually really interested in where it was I was going and what it was I was doing. And I think that that's a massive, massive void because in what we do, you would hope that what we do is absolutely objective, that you build this pile of work and you work so hard and you have this and you can see that it's this. So if we take the names off, you can see that it's 20 publications and they're in Nature Medicine and reputable journals and things. Well, I don't have 20 in Nature Medicine, but you hit those targets. You've done all the things right, and you take your name off and you look amazing, and then but the stepping stones aren't put out for you. And that, I think, I could have, as I said, I could have spent the whole time on personal challenges. And when you go to a place like I came to, Waterloo, and they were very excited, and I felt like what I had done was finally being respected. It was amazing. But what was missing for me along the way, and where I think we lose women, is that they're not being given those opportunities. It's not entirely objective. Much of what we do requires an incredible input of resources. I need grants. I need people to give me a freedom from teaching at times. I need support staff to help me organize things and get things done. I need the Office of Research Ethics to approve things for me. I need people to review things for me. I need a huge output of human capital, of money, of students, of the list is ongoing. And those things, some of those things need to be given. They need to be actually given. So there's a pile of money, a pot of money in Ottawa that gets given out to scientists. And I'd like to say that it's objective, and they look at you and say that you're this ball of, you bring this huge ball of stuff in and say, I've done this. This is what I'm capable of. And they say, the big ball gets this. But they don't. It's very often somebody knows of the work of someone, or they know of the work of your supervisor, and then that helps. And if your supervisor is willing to put you forward and to make those steps for you. I went and talked to one of the senior female members of my old department where I did my PhD, and she talked about the success of some of my male colleagues and said, they've been very successful. They've done really well with what they've been given, but they've been given things. Someone put out a stepping stone and they stepped on it, and then someone put out another stepping stone and they stepped on that one. And I was at the point where I said I'd come back from California, I'd spent 4 years, I'd published in high-impact journals, and I needed a stepping stone, and nobody was willing to put that out for me. And it was incredibly demoralizing. It was very difficult to have worked that hard and accomplished as much as I had, and to have earned respect in big places, and to come back and not have that support. And people said, well, where are some of the people who should be here advocating for you? Where are they? And I said, well, they're very nice people and they're good friends, and they should be advocating for me, but they're not. And maybe they've spent their capital on my previous male colleagues who've gotten those stepping stones. I don't know. But I did not get the material support that I needed. And that is a problem, because many people will just turn away, and you wonder why there is a leaky pipeline. Someone has to approve your grants and allow you that relief from teaching if you need it at some point in time, or allow you to have the time off for maternity leave and not have to hide the fact that you're pregnant. These things have to happen, and there's an allocation of CFI funding when you come into a department, and there's an allocation of space in labs, and all of these things are things that are given out. They're things that are handed out, and they are not entirely objective. And someone has to subjectively say, you're worth it. I'm going to give you this. And in the absence of that, in that vacuum, you end up fighting very, 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 very hard. And sometimes it's just too hard. Sometimes you're just too tired. And I have a lot to give, and I would like to not be quite so tired, or not be so tired at this early point in my career from having fought for so long. And I bring, there's a saying, if more people were screaming, then I can relax. And I think it's all I can do not to just start screaming sometimes. We need to do that for the next generation. It absolutely has to be material. The government has to do it. You can't just create a program like the Canada Research Chairs and then give 85% of them the tier 2s when 46% of new faculty were women and they were performing equally well in grants, and 85% of the first 3 years went to men. You've just given, not only have you given something out, but you've stolen something from people who've worked so very hard. Crime pays, it really does. If you can get away with it, it's a great way to make a living. You can get so much for so little effort. Stealing from people, you're not going to survive if that continues to happen. We have to sit up and say that this is a problem. You cannot steal from people and expect that they're going to continue the battle, that they're going to continue to fight. They're going to quit, and they do, and they have. They've spoken with their feet. That's why there are less women than there should be, and we can change that.
Okay, I'm going to ask someone from the established panel here to talk about mentorship, someone you've mentored or mentorship that you've had. Go ahead, May Diane.
So I would say also mentorship is critical. I didn't mention that comment about writing papers during my maternity leave was from my assigned faculty mentor. It's important because it gives you a range of information about the possibilities that you may not already have. It gives you an advocate for what you need. The women faculty of MIT at one point, I believe it was about 10 years ago, organized around the idea that they were being subjected to systematic bias. And their comment was that it was like death by 1,000 pinpricks. Your office is slightly smaller, your lab is slightly smaller, you get slightly less on each grant renewal, and it adds up to you battling constantly to be on the same footing as your male colleagues. A mentorship and mentorship networks can help with this, because you don't know there's a problem until either you organize and you realize that you're all feeling the same thing, or your mentor says, I'm senior and I'm telling you that it should not be this way, and I'm going to help you figure out how to redress the problem. Mentors are also important because having someone who you know can write you letters of recommendation that are not biased, someone who can introduce you to an audience and give you credit where it's due is critical. So there are actually data that show that if an authority figure introduces you to an audience with information about your accomplishments, that audience will evaluate the same talk or the same discussion as being much more effective and you as being more effective leader than if you aren't introduced by an authority figure. So it's important to find these kinds of mentors in your life. And of course, that sort of thing has a bigger effect if your initial assessment is lower, as it often is for women as a baseline. It's hard to find them. There's not a lot of senior women out there in a lot of fields. And so I think it's up to administration to make an effort to find appropriate mentors. They don't always have to be female, but to find appropriate mentors for people.
Yes, right there, and then we'll go over here and then there.
Thank you. I'm from the University of Ottawa, a postdoctoral fellow with the Postdoc Association, and I also sit on the Equity, Diversity, and Gender Committee there. And the committee has been, just in the last year, trying to put together a female mentorship program for postdoctoral fellows, primarily because with all the stats and things that are coming out, that you see a big drop-off in at the professorship level. So 50-50 at postdoctoral fellow, or maybe a little bit less, but then you do see a drop off after that. So just a few comments on that when we started discussing it, just from some of the other female postdocs, and even some people in the committee thought, and myself as well, this is sort of biased away from men, like they should have this opportunity as well, a mentorship program. So the program is meant to be for, to pair up with a faculty member to continue, to promote women to continue into academia, and also to provide some, say, workshops, et cetera, for career development. So yeah, some of the response was that it's unfair towards men, and also another thing that we've sort of heard and just sort of discussions with others is that maybe women do not want to continue in academia because it's a hard life to live. It's a hard life to live with if you want a balanced family, et cetera. And so I just I think that's something that needs to be addressed, is that the expectations of women and men in academia perhaps are too high, that it is hard to sort of balance that. And then it's interesting that a lot of young women don't necessarily see the bias. And I even see that from some of what the young panel has said, that they don't always see the bias, or what Dr. Duncan said, that she didn't see it right away. So yeah, those are just, so I don't really have a question, it was just more of a comment.
Can I answer that
Sure.
question? I just, one of the things that's really important to me is including men in these conversations, and especially, I see some of my issues as a woman as actually becoming issues about being a parent, and balancing this. And I don't really see those issues as being any different than some of my male colleagues. In my office, I've got a picture of my 2 beautiful children, and we have, visiting speakers come in, they chat for the day. And inevitably, if it's a young assistant professor who's a man, all he wants to do is talk about the kids and how you balance that and all that sort of stuff too. So these are not conversations that we just need to be having with women. And in fact, I think, what we need to do is have the expectation change so that men take time off with their kids too. So they're just as much of a liability as we are. I'm done with asking women to do more. I'm done with that. I think we've done as much as we can. I'm done. But I'm not done asking the men to do more. So I think, in a year's parental leave, 6 months off for women, 6 months off for man. Make every postdoc male you hire just as much of a liability as the women. And I really think that's the way forward for us. So I do believe, and I mentor the postdoc in my lab now, the male postdoc in my who has a young family and has a 2-career family. I think I spend just as much time working with him and helping him get to the career things and use the vocabulary he needs and work on his self-promotion and things like that. I spend more time with him than the super aggressive women I've got in my lab. So I think, I really think, although I'm glad we're having this discussion, obviously I'm very committed to women's issues, I'm also very committed to parenting issues. And I think having men in that conversation is really important. And I certainly try to incorporate that into my own mentorship.
Wendy?
Yeah, I was going to say that actually the evidence increasingly is that some of the issues that were primarily gender issues when I was going through are now issues for both men and women, and that younger people have much higher expectations generally about work-life balance, so I agree with that. I think the issue around mentoring that's important to remember is this whole notion of unspoken rules. And the fact is that in general, not always, lots of places are welcoming, inclusive, and so on. But in general, where men dominate the power structures, they tend to more instinctively include young men in their networks and circles. And that's part of the reason why very often young men have more access to FaceTime and to tacit knowledge that is actually really essential for success. And there are lots of examples that I can think of in working in academic administration, for example, where the women focus on task. And they're working 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, sleeping on the floor, to get all the stuff done. And their male colleagues are always going for lunch. And this might not be a story about me, but it might also. Said female administrator was sitting, grumbling. I work 24/7. Those guys are working banker's hours. They're always going for 2-hour lunches. Yet somehow, everyone was far more aware of what they were doing than what said female administrator buried in her office was doing. And part of that was women often focus on task, writing all the papers and doing all the work and being on all the committees and supervising all the students, and not A, talking about what they're doing, and B, not building the networks with the people that can actually help them. Which brings me to another point. And I said at the beginning that I feel really strongly that we have to take a kind of systemic approach to this. Recognize the broad structural barriers and impediments and stereotypes and all of the things that are critically important to recognize, but also understand individual agency and the fact that in spite of those barriers, people can be successful. And, I don't know if people in the audience know who Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers are, but one of my favorite expressions was Ann Richards, who was the governor of Texas, said once, this will be the title of my autobiography if I ever write it, that Ginger Rogers did everything Fred Astaire did backwards and in high heels. And it still is true, it's unfair, but it may be what you have to do. So many people say, I want a mentor, and think a mentor is like a fairy godmother who will miraculously appear, give you a coach and a great dress, and get you to the ball. Often, you actually have to ask. You actually have to approach people. You actually have to cold call. You'd be amazed at the number of young women who bang on my door and say, hi, I want to have coffee with you, and it takes me a few minutes to figure out why they're there. And they're actually coming because they want to tell me about what they're doing. They want to ask me questions. And I have incredible respect for their initiative. People will very seldom say no if you reach out to them and ask them for help. So I think that's critically important. And the other piece is making demands. One of the things that I observe And it's completely unfair. It's completely unfair. You do an analysis. There is no question. The men have bigger labs. They have bigger startup grants. They have higher starting salaries, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's partly systemic bias, and it's partly women don't ask. So I have seen this. I have seen this with my naked eyes. You offer a man a job, and he says, I want a corner office. I want this much money. I want this much space. I want this and that and this and that, and I'll let you know in 3 weeks if I'll take the job. You offer a woman a job, and she says, you like me, you really like me, and signs up immediately. And the one recommendation I would make to everybody in this room is think about negotiation skills, read the book, Women Don't Ask. Women have to make more demands. Things that are offered, and it's absolutely true that the steps are often laid out. It's absolutely true that the secret signs and handshakes and tricks are often shared more freely with our male colleagues. That doesn't mean that you should accept that. And if you make demands, you'll be surprised at how many people will actually give you what you want. So, you know, you have to take more risks very often. And as I said, I long for the day, in fact, where we don't have to have meetings like this because everything's taken care of. But until then, I think we have to recognize the structural problems, but also do everything we can individually to help ourselves and help each other.
Okay, we've got time for a couple more questions. There was one here, and then we'll go over there. Right here in the middle.
Thank you. I'm Sophia Heyer. I'm Executive Director of Women in Global Science and Technology. We do a lot of research and analysis on the situation of women in science, technology, and innovation in the developing context and in the international system. And one of the questions I had was actually in regards to what Lorna was saying about the drop in the percentage of women from assistant professor to full professor. In the US, there's a lot of research that's emerging that's attributing that in main part or to women's domestic kind of role, and that female faculty are dropping out because it's a conflict between their desire to have children and their need to publish and get grants for tenure, and there's not a really supportive environment in the university. So a lot of them self-select out. They just decide to stay home, take a few years off, have children, and thereby, of course, lose their place in the file, or they go into industry, or they start their own business, or they take another job entirely. And there's interesting work being done at UC Berkeley, where they're instituting a number of policies to support young women faculty, and they include, daycare on site. They include policies to encourage the male faculty to take paternity leave and time off. They are instituting policies which will not penalize women for having breaks and so forth. And so, Lauren, I was just wondering if you could speak a little bit to what you were saying about the organizational university factors that the panel found were causing this drop. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Sophia and I have worked together for many years, and we always used to envy the women who came from various parts of Africa who had mother-in-laws and aunts, so they could just leave their kids. The rest of us were racing home. And I think you're absolutely right. A lot of it is attributed in North America to the family experience. We have a backward culture with respect to children, and we need to change that culture. And all the things you've mentioned are very important. Child care is very important. But you also have to go to international conferences and present papers when you are a scientist to help your career. And can you take your children with you? And I now believe that in this country, anyway, that's largely an individual. You might find a department head who says yes, if you're breastfeeding, for example, but you probably won't. And when you compare the experience of people here, of parents here, with parents in European countries, never mind extended families, European countries, it's just a totally different experience, and we need to change it. And we've been trying to get proper child care in this country since when? I mean, forever. We are so backward with respect to children. It is pathetic. But if I may just say, if I were starting the jobs I've done in, like being a president, again, I would look at the faculty and look at the parents, men, women, and everybody else, and try and develop some policies around there. I'm awfully sorry I didn't do it when I had the chance.
Okay, we had a question over here.
Hello, my name is Golnas Karubi, and I work here at the UHN. Thank you to all the panelists for taking the time to be here today. Part of my question was answered in the previous comment, but I'm in a special situation right now. I was in Europe for the past 5-6 years in Switzerland, and there isn't such a huge Persian community, so my name was often taken as a male name. And so I really had very little issues. My emails got answered almost immediately, and it was always addressed as Mr. Karubi, and I had no problems. I had no problems dealing with female students, but I always came across the problems of either dealing with male graduate students who were under my supervision. I wasn't a principal investigator, but I was leading the group there. And there were very little colleagues who were female to work with, and I often had difficulties working with the male ones. But in any case, I made it work. And I always thought that that was an issue that was specific to Europe or Switzerland. I finished my PhD degree here and went there immediately after, so I didn't have an idea of what it was to work here. So being back here, it's a special situation because I decided not to go down the the assistant professor route because I do have a young baby now, and I decided that that would impede my family life to a certain extent, and one that I didn't have something so passionate about that I wanted to devote my whole career to. So, but I do like academia and I do like the science of it, and so I have a senior position in the lab. And I'm finding now that it's even more of a challenge, and I spend so much time and trying to finesse methods of trying to deal with the men I work with who also have senior positions and the graduate students who are male, and I feel like so much of my time that should be devoted to my job is being devoted to trying to figure out ways to overcome these gender biased battles that I actually had no idea existed to this extent here. And so I'm wondering if you could offer some strategies to overcome these issues that you've experienced yourself. Like, how did you, because the sense I got is that all of you have some sort of experience with gender bias. So how did you overcome them?
I don't know that we have. That hasn't been my experience, to be honest. I'm pretty good at being the boss and being bossy, and people seem to respect that. So I've never had the experience with dealing with either male colleagues who haven't treated me or male students or trainees who haven't treated me respectfully. And I guess my only advice for dealing with men is keep it simple, direct, and don't preface your things with, I think I would like it if you could possibly get me that by Tuesday. Just say, I need the draft by Tuesday. And that would be my only thing, the only communication difference I find.
So no subtleties.
Yeah, just simple. I don't know.
Shiva?
Yeah, I think I haven't really had that much either. I mean, I have been in very male-dominated fields, and I haven't really felt that. But again, I think it's a mindset issue as well, and you really need to just move forward and not really think about that. Don't set that up in your head at all. Just ignore that completely and just do whatever you need to do.
Hey, Diane?
It can be a problem, though. I had 2 years after I started in my position, I had a postdoctoral fellow who was male, white, and older than me. It was an unsuccessful postdoc, partly because I could not get him to give me data and to sit down and have conversations about his data. I tried a variety of different ways. I'm never equivocal, or never was with him. And so sometimes it doesn't work. Sometimes if the atmosphere is if you feel it is challenging enough, you might want to look for another position. But sometimes you might want to try these strategies first, which would be to state what you want clearly without any equivocation. Set deadlines. I expect this by such and such a date, and that's it. No conversation, right? If it doesn't happen, there are consequences for why it doesn't happen, especially if this is someone junior to you. So I would suggest that sort of thing and avoid the interpersonal drama as much as possible. But I am sympathetic because I did have this experience. It was perhaps a foolish person to hire on my part, but I was optimistic and knew.
Lorna, do you want to respond to that?
If you have a senior person in your department who understands this, you might use that voice. Sometimes it's quite useful to say to a man who has been around and understands the situation, you tell them. And if they do that, then you can get away from having to change the tune, which is so effortful.
Okay, thank you very much. Unfortunately, this is the conclusion of our Q&A, and it's been very, very insightful. I can't help but reflect on having been around the block for a long time and having fought these battles back in the early 70s. I can't believe we're still talking about this in the 21st century, and it's just so unfortunate. But here we are, and we've heard some mitigating strategies, and I want to thank our panelists for their personal stories, for their offers of advice, for their insights. I think we've had a tremendous round of storytelling and insights, and I'd like to just ask you to join me in a hand of applause. Now, I was handed a note that said, please ask people to fill out the evaluation forms. So where are there evaluation forms? Yeah, okay. And what we'd like you to do on those evaluation forms is recommend some action plans. And if you're prepared to take some action, that would be helpful for you to identify as well. And I assume that if you're prepared to take some action, you'll need to put your name to it so that somebody can follow up with you and some contact information. And another thing that we'd like you to do on the evaluation form is, what's the next step here? What should we be doing now? Is there something else that the CSPC should be doing to follow up on this discussion? And with that, I'd like to thank you all for coming. And before we close, I'd like to invite Stephanie Swift up. She's been a member of the organizing committee, and she'll close us out. Thanks very much.